Hello, dear students. Good day. We are going on with appreciating prose, and we have seen how prose evolved out of the language English a long time ago, and how, as years went by, it progressed and was used by the people, and it came up to Francis Bacon, and I think we have stopped there in the last class. You will find that during the Elizabethan times, Francis Bacon and the others tried using English prose, but they were using it without much confidence in the sense that English was still a young language when compared to Latin and Greek, and so they were not confident that English will live for a long time. As you have seen now, how very wrong their idea was then. But now we have to see the types of prose used in those days and from these earlier days. Shall we move on from the Elizabethan days to the present stage? In today's class, you are going to learn certain terms like tracts, pamphlets, and treatises. These are important when you learn prose, because if you want to get to the basis or even the earlier form of the prose as it exists now, you have to pass through all these phases, in the sense that prose was not used by many writers at that time, because poetry was always the favorite. But these tracts and pamphlets and treatises were used by the learned men to write or to express their views. Let's see what these three categories are. Let's see what a tract is. A tract is a literary work, usually religious in nature. The idea of a tract is changed now. It could be a brief pamphlet used for religious and political purposes, but more often used for religious purposes. So you find in the definition of a tract that it is usually religious in nature. Dear students, I would like to take you back to your history lessons. I'm sure that Sir Aaron Sir had really taught you well, and you are thorough with the Elizabethan times and of the religious controversy that really existed at that time. So, when the king changes his religion, or there is a change in his attitude towards the papal throne, naturally, some people will support him, but some others will be against him. So, in order to express their views, this tract was used. Means the notices or even leaflets where their opinions stating their reasons and vehemently supporting their opinion, everything was written down, and this was done in prose. And so people from both Anglican Church and also from the Roman Catholic Church, these two groups existed at that time in England, and both groups really expressed their views vehemently, some of them criticizing the king and some of them criticizing the pope. So these were expressed in tracts. So vehemently they wrote, and this writing formed, or this most of them were religious in nature. They had their own opinion about religion, and because of that, a tract has usually a religious background. So if you use the term tract now, it has got a different meaning. It could be a brief pamphlet used for religious and political purposes. Mind you, that religion and politics were going hand in hand in England because the king himself had established a new religion, and it is in that sense it is said that both in a religious sense and political sense, the tract is used. But now the tract is used only for or mainly for religious purpose. Let's see what a pamphlet is. A pamphlet is a small booklet or leaflet containing information or arguments about a single subject. You have seen people distributing pamphlets at the gates of some of the institutions because they have something to convey to you. And this pamphlet is either a leaflet, means a small page of something, a small notice. Nowadays, you use the term notice, and that notice is what we call a pamphlet. And sometimes it can also be in the form of a booklet, as a very thin book, and this is something that contains information or arguments about a single subject. Suppose it is your political opinion, suppose it is your religious opinion. People used to write pamphlets or even a leaflet, which can also be called a pamphlet, and it is their arguments or the information about how this is good and how the other is bad. All that arguments can be seen, and only one subject is dealt with in a pamphlet. So for that also, prose is. The last one is a treatise. A treatise is a written work dealing formally and systematically with a subject. Means you are going to write on a topic, and instead of using the word essay, they use the word treatise. It is a written work dealing formally and very systematically. It goes from one argument to the other argument and continues with the same theme till the very end. So, this was the term that was used in the earlier days by the people who wrote in prose. And nowadays, you have another term, essay, and it is longer. And sometimes a treatise need not be as long as an essay, but still we regard it as an essay in the modern times. But a treatise is especially about a single subject, and it deals formally and systematically. There is no personal involvement there, and so it is very formal and systematic, and it deals with only one subject. So these are the three terms that you have to learn in connection with the prose of the modern times. So why do we have these pamphlet and tract, pamphlet and treatise? You know that I'm sure that most of you read newspapers, in the sense that compared to your last year, when I asked you that last year, some of you just do not read the newspapers daily. But I think the condition has changed now, and now that you are at home, you eagerly wait for the newspapers to go through, because you find that anything that is written in the form of a paper, and you can turn over the pages and you can find a lot of news in the newspapers. And since you are learning about newspapers, you know that it comes of a later origin. And before that, even much, much before the newspapers existed, they used to have the tract, pamphlet, and treatises. So the only thing is that these things dealt with only one subject. And since their argument was either political or religious by nature, they wrote about these topics, only one topic, and their argument was vehement and very supportive of. They put in reasons one after the other to support their argument, and these were distributed among the people. So this is why the terms tract, pamphlet, and treatise was used in connection with the origin of prose work. So when you come to from the early days on, you find that in connection with the pamphlets and treatises, the name of John Milton is really important. You have heard of Milton as a poet who writes epic and also great poetry. You have learned his sonnet, but he was a person who was against monarchy, and monarchy in the sense that he was more a Puritan rather than an Anglican. So John Milton's anti-prelatical tracts are a series of 5 political pamphlets that attack the episcopal form of church leadership. So Milton was a person who could really write, and he was quite proud of the fact that he is a poet, and he just came down to the level of the common people by writing in prose. He wrote tracts, and it is a series of 5 political pamphlets. And why did he write these political pamphlets? He has his own reasons, being a Puritan, and at the same time, he started attacking the episcopal form of church leadership. So, understanding the situation of England, you can imagine how it will be a good writing from the part of an academician and also one who supports the political party, the then existent political party. And so, within no time at all, his tracts became really famous. And you'll find the Anglican prose and Puritan prose existing at that time. Anglican Church really had a lot of writers, and their writing formed the main part of prose at that time. And it was characterized by a kind of sleekness and also a kind of holiness, unction, because they believed that nothing could be wrong with their church. There is the Puritan prose, because the Puritans, John Milton was a Puritan, and that the prose of the Puritans were harsh, but at the same time they had their own arguments. So these prose works of both Anglicans and Puritans could be found during this time, and it continued even after the Puritan stage at the time of the Puritans, and it continued to the next generation too. Hundreds of pamphlets and treatises were published in defense of the political thought the writers believed in at that time. You find people taking up sides. All types of religious factions appeared at that time, not just between the the Roman Church and also the Anglican Church. You find Lutheranism and Calvinism, and people were in favor of that, and they also started writing tracts and pamphlets and started publishing them. And so, with the printing press, these pamphlets became very popular and these were distributed among the people. And so, this is one way of understanding how prose progressed. Because people knew, or the writers knew quite well, that if you have to reach the people, then they'll have to use prose. Their poetry will reach only a selected few. So, in order to convey their arguments, both political and their religion wise, they used prose, and these prose was written as tracts or pamphlets, and these were published and they were distributed among the people. So here, when you come to the 18th century, you find the names of certain people here mentioned. One is Swift, Jonathan Swift, Daniel Defoe, and Steele and Addison. And I'm not mentioning their proper name because they are mainly known as Steele and Addison. They are that famous in that manner. So you find Swift, Jonathan Swift, who wrote Gulliver's Travels, but who also wrote a lot of Gulliver's Travels cannot be called a fiction, but at the same time it is fictitious. But at the same time, he used prose most effectively. And he also wrote pamphlets and treatises. So, in a way, his name is also important in the development of English prose. The other one, the next person, is Daniel Defoe. You know him as the author who wrote Robinson Crusoe. It is a travelogue, means that of a shipwrecked person who was able to find solace in an island, lonely island, and he made do with the things that are available on the island, and there was no one to help him. And so finally, from there, he was saved and brought back to his country. And this becomes a good reading. But the way he writes about places, you feel that he had been to all these places, he had traveled a long way, and that he had gone to all these places and the island, strange island, and come across these people. But the thing is that Daniel Defoe had not ever sailed. He had not stepped out of his country or even his house. So, in that manner, you can regard it as a chase log or something that is written from the chair without actually going round the world or even traveling. But even Daniel Defoe's name is important here because he had written two essays or two pamphlets, and it is for this that we are including him in the history of English prose. And he had written the book called Complete English Gentleman and a Journal of the Plague Year. The Complete English Gentleman is indeed a prose work where he takes the stand for the middle class and gives definite support to tradesmen. Why does he have to take sides with the tradesmen? You know that it was the rule of the monarchy, but people had traveled across the length and breadth of the world and had brought in the wealth of these countries, and they had also brought in stories about these different countries. Daniel Defoe enjoyed these stories, and at the same time, he was quite aware of the importance of the middle class people, people who are not noble class, people who are not the extremely low class, but the middle class people who had a little bit of education, but maybe they may not have connections with the court. But they had excellent taste in everything, and it is with them that he took sides. The tradesmen also, because the tradesmen brought in things and sold them, and as such, their wealth is increasing, and they are becoming a very important part of the society of England. Till then, it was the monarchy, the noblemen, and the servants. Only that there was no middle class, not much to speak of. But now you find the rise of the middle class, and it is about them that he writes in his work, The Complete English Gentleman. The second work written by Daniel Defoe is very relevant now. You are going through, or maybe we are going through a pandemic, and his journal of the plague year deals with the authentic evidence concerning the plague that existed in London at that time. So it is more about, it is not just vague suppositions. He was writing exactly about the condition of the people and how it came about. And so the Journal of the Plague Year becomes a historical landmark. For this, he used prose. So when you use a journal, you can't just write unnecessarily about certain things. You have to be very specific about it. And so, in that sense, he was able to tone his language, and his work was something that became a landmark in the history of English literature or even English life. So these two works of Daniel Defoe, The Complete English Gentleman and A Journal of the Plague Year, forms the very important fact of English life. And if you really want to be an English gentleman, you better read Daniel Defoe, because he was able to lead these tradesmen to be the proper English gentleman, and it is more about them, and they are just rising up in power. And so these people were taking an interest in politics also. So politics was not restricted, not to restricted to just the noblemen or the people from nobility, but now it is becoming the part of the middle class people also. And so this work of Daniel Defoe, the Complete English Gentleman, became very popular at that time. So here, the two names, Steele and Addison, are really inseparable. Their works are independent and their temper more opposed than harmonious. Their names appear associated in the literary world. As I told you earlier, without the two names, Steele and Addison, the history of English prose is never complete, because their contribution is such a valuable one to the development of English prose that their names are taken always together. There is no separate Steele or Edison, but you find Steele and Edison always taken together. These two men are quite inseparable, and you find in them a real enthusiasm for writing prose. And in what sense do you find this man, Steele and Edison, really important? I'm sure that you are reading newspapers now. Earlier, means last year, when I asked the class, only very few used to read newspapers every day. But now I think the situation has changed. Even though the newspaper pages had diminished to a large extent, you still bother to take up the newspaper and read it. We have a lot of other ways of getting news. In spite of that, the newspaper forms a solid evidence of, or something that is solid, which you can hold on to, and at the same time turn on the pages. And some people can really understand news only if they read the newspaper rather than see the news in the television. We have become that much addicted to newspaper for a long, long time. Even before the newspaper arrived on the scene, we have the works of Steele and Addison. It is in that sense they are really important. The work of Steele and Addison was mainly in the Spectator. The Spectator remains the supreme expression of the middle class, and Steele and Addison are the authors. There is again another one called the Tatler, which is the individual work of Steele. Out of this comes the Spectator. So what are these? The Tatler and the Spectator. Let's take that the Tatler is just something that Steele started, and it will now develop to the Spectator. So let us focus on the Spectator. What is this Spectator that Steele and Addison are attached to? Spectator is actually a periodical meant for information. Unlike a newspaper, it neglects the happenings of every day, except occasionally. Both Addison and Steele, with a few friends, made up subject matter for more than 21 months. Sometimes they wrote letters in the form of as giving not their name but some other name, and asked about the editor and about certain the news that came in there. But this Spectator became very popular in those days. The Spectator is, in a way, a sort of a newspaper. We can't say exactly the newspaper, but it is the Spectator where you find both Edison, Steele, and some of their friends adding more to the news rather than to pursuing a long essay. So all types of interesting items you can find in the Spectator. And if there is a theater performance or some people attending, then you'll find some write up about that also. And again, you find letters to the editor where some person had written to the editor. And mostly it is these three people, this Addison Steele and their friends, who wrote that. But even then, the readers really enjoyed reading the Spectator because it is something worthwhile to wait for. So printing helped them to circulate these news about the London Society, and people also really enjoyed learning or reading about the London Society or what was happening in the society. So naturally, this became extremely popular. So they were able to continue for a long time. This is not either a monthly or a daily, but it is a periodical, which is actually meant for information. Means such and such things will be happening in such and such place, and people will be aware of that. And if you are not able to attend such a function, then there will be a write up of that function in the next issue of the Spectator. And naturally, people were eager to read about that. And for that you really need a very good hand in prose. And prose reached people understood whatever it is written there. They don't need the help of a dictionary or even the help of another person to understand what was written there. It is the language of the common people, the language spoken by them. So it is in that manner the Spectator became really popular. As authors of The Spectator, Addison and Steele exercised a moral influence which counts in the history of English culture. They were the people who reported the people coming to the such and such places, and if some person is coming with another person, and whether it is they legally right or not, all these where people all these people can judge for themselves. And in a way, this is something that reported on the London society. So in a way, people were, or even the people who moved about in the London society, were aware that there are indeed people who are looking at them, and they will be reported in the next issue of the Spectator. So, in a way, this English cultural history becomes important, and the name of the Spectator, or the name Spectator, becomes a watchword in the development of the cultural history, in this cultural history. Because when you contribute much to the development of the culture, that it becomes very important. The Spectator did its part quite well. And so here you find both Addison and Steele getting a lot of publicity or a lot of people supporting them. But most often they were quite happy to roam about, and they had these coffee houses, and where the people came and talked and discussed a lot of things. And these became the themes for the next issue of Spectator. Mind you, the Spectator was not on one topic alone. It reported a lot of things that are happening, a lot of incidents that are happening in the London society. And whatever that they thought, that Edison and Steele thought of, that became the write up of that Spectator. And this and what were his their friends also understood their way of writing, and they also catered to that, because whatever that Addison and Steele couldn't write, the others supplied. And in a way it went on. And mainly it is said that there were 21 issue of the Spectator, which is indeed a great landmark considering the times that they lived in, considering the number of people who read, and considering the way they could continue with the to circulate it among the people. So all in all, it was something that they enjoyed doing, and they were very successful in taking it up to a great extent. And the name Spectator, the Spectator, and the names Addison and Steele are very important in the field of English prose. As I told you earlier, before the starting of prose, certain people contribute much to the development of prose, English prose, because they believe that the language will develop one day. And so they contributed in their own way by adding tidbits about the society or some incident that had happened, and this became good reading material for the people. Not many people were able to buy things as such, and especially the printed articles, but the very little that was printed and distributed among the people became precious, and these were eagerly waited on by the readers. So in a way, it could be a kind of a periodical, means weekly or monthly or whatever it is that you would like to call them. But in a way, you find that this is indeed something that contributed much to prose, and the prose improved daily as a result of being used in the proper manner, and English prose at that, because mostly it was prose was written in Latin, or the main writings was in Latin, and very few academicians or writers dared to take up English, thinking that English will not survive. So, in this sense, Addison and Steele were the stalwarts of English language also, not just English culture, but language also is part of culture. So, in that manner, their names are to be remembered forever. You find in these the moral, as I told you earlier, they took the society in their own manner, looked at the society in their own manner, and they became the spectators of their society. And through their periodical, the readers also understand that the eyes that look up on the society are indeed eyes which will tell them the truth. So people also started depending on the Spectator and waiting eagerly for the next issue of the Spectator. And how much money they spend and things like that, we have no idea. But even then, that's not the best part. The best part is that it was enjoyed by a lot of people. If you take historically also, you find that people really enjoy reading that. Don't you feel that you can really enjoy a newspaper after so many days of being quarantined or even locked down? You feel that the newspaper will bring news about a lot of things. Of course, you have the other media now. Even then, early in the morning, if you get a newspaper, you know the news items from the very beginning till the very end. And because you have a lot of time at your disposal, you turn over the pages one after the other, check the news items. Sometimes you find a lot of, not just two news items in the front page, you find a lot of news items in the front page. And of course, there will be the advertisements. And along with that, in the next page and the next page, you find the region wise and country wise news, and even news about the countries outside India. So you wait for that and read in detail about these. Of course, you have, if you really want to know about such and such things, you can look up the television, or you can check your mobile. That is just another question. But even then, this newspaper is really important. Even now, you feel that the relevance of newspaper had diminished almost to nothing, but it is not so. To at least to a certain number of people. And the periodical, The Spectator, was in a way a forerunner of the present day newspaper with all the important items. And it was not, maybe it was not that very strict about the newsworthiness, but even then, whatever they knew, it was limited to the London locality, not to the other to the other regions. But even then, this became a habit of the people to read news about London and the London society through the Spectator. So both Addison and Steele, like two eyes, remained the eyes of the London society, of the people, and it is through their eyes the other people read or saw the London society. So it is that which makes it really landmark in English culture, and their names are to be remembered forever. Thank you.